Thank you, Jamie. See, I know what the heck I'm doing. Okay, cool. Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us for yet another Arizona chapter with GIS. This month, we have 4 lightning talks lined up. Thank you to everybody who agreed to do a presentation. We probably have plenty of time. So originally we said like 15 minutes, but we're not going to be like super strict on that. It can be shorter, it can be longer, whatever works. Let's see here. Before we get going on the talks, let me just throw out a reminder that our next Mugs and Mornings is on the morning of May 20th. So yay. I always love seeing everybody's shining faces in the morning. And the book that we're reading right now is called American Nations. I just started it. I'm going to put the book title in the chat. I just started it, like I'm 4 pages into it, but so far it looks very interesting, and there's actual maps in it, which is exciting. So those are the 2 things that are coming up fairly quickly. Well, the Mugs and Mornings, the book club, we don't have that meeting until June 21st. But let's get this rolling. So Karen, since you were in there, so I think you're going to be the first one up. So Jamie, this is do you have to give people permission to present thing? Yeah. Cool. Yeah. Awesome. Okay. So Karen, you are up.
All right.
And I'll let you introduce your talk and so on. Yeah. I'm just gonna get out of your way now.
Thanks, Jen. You're never in the way though. Let me see if I can share. All right. Can you see the presentation, or are you guys seeing something else? Presentation? Okay, perfect. Awesome. So I'm Karen Fisher. I am a GIS analyst at Central Arizona Project, and I worked on a land use project for the urban areas within our service area to help with our water demand modeling. And I worked on with Vivian Baji, who is a planning analyst at Central Arizona Project as well. So what we were focusing on was for that water demand model. So we wanted to look at outdoor water use because it's the highest amount of use. So we needed to understand, like find out what is grass, what is trees, and what is non-vegetation. So we used free data because we had no budget for this. So we worked at using NAEP data and LiDAR data from 3DEP. And then our main classifications was that the vegetation, non-vegetation, water, and then we also focused in on artificial turf, just out of due for interest. And then another major part of our project is we wanted to have some peer collaborations and working with the water providers on this as well. So Central Arizona's projects service area are the 3 counties of Maricopa, Pinal, and Pima. So it's a very large area, but we were focusing on the urban land. So first, the model that they use is focusing on the active management areas. So that's what's in the black here. You see, so we have the Phoenix AMA, the Pinal AMA, and the Tucson AMA. And then within that is our area of interest, which is the neon green. So it's all of the urban areas, removed any protected areas, but we did keep in some of the undeveloped areas or agricultural areas near the development, as we wanted to use this footprint over time. So that is also in there. And then this is our final classification. So you can see we had non-vegetation, different classifications of vegetation and water. And I'll kind of give a very high level of how we did this. So what we really focused on was getting that vegetation index first from the NAEP. That gave us the water, vegetation, and non-vegetation. And we also processed the LiDAR so we could have the height, so we could know the difference between the grass and the trees. And then we did, for artificial turf, we had to do a separate supervised classification, and then we enhanced all of these with known features. So For vegetation, I want to go back and explain. So remember I mentioned that agricultural areas were included. We did not do a classification on what kind of crop there is there. So we didn't differentiate between citrus or cotton or alfalfa. It's just agriculture vegetation. So we could have that timestamp if it did move into urban later. But then when we're focusing on vegetation, we're looking at intensity of water use. So we wanted to know have categories understand the health, with assuming that it's you water your landscape, the healthier it would be. So you'd have a higher water use. And so here is the matrix. So these are all the classifications for vegetation. And this matrix kind of helps explain how we were doing that. So we have height from the LiDAR data. So we have ground cover, low, medium, and high. And then with the health, we're calling unhealthy, moderately healthy, and healthy. So what you can use with this is if you're irrigating your grass, you're essentially going to be in this moderate to healthy range here on the ground cover. And then, when you get to like the medium height, that's where you're going to see your native trees that we have. And then everything above the 5 meters is non-native trees, essentially. So that kind of helps you understand how you're using water with those vegetation. Our other big category was water. So we start off with the NDVI, and we just know all these pixels are water. But for a water demand modeling, you're really just interested in pools and urban lakes. So those are the things that you're using water for landscaping. So we needed to create buckets for the different categories. We used vector data because we already knew where the urban lakes, canals, and water treatment plants were. So we were able to, those were the largest buckets. So we were able to just kind of classify those into those categories. And then we did several different classifications for pools. One was to remove shadows from the water using an isocluster unsupervised classification. And then we enhanced it with using another supervised classification off the NDVI, and that so we could categorize different pools and then what were the other features that were left. And then finally, that leaves us with non-vegetation, which we aren't interested for the water demand modeling, but it enhances it by knowing where the buildings are. So we use the Bing rooftop buildings that they provide to classify those. And then we did do a supervised classification because people are always interested on artificial turf when it comes to water management, understanding that people are replacing regular turf with artificial turf in different neighborhoods. The big caveat we had here was we had a lot of misclass in sports courts because they both have a very similar signature, looking green, but aren't alive. So we did digitize in a lot of sport courts to separate those because we could look at parks, high schools, affluent neighborhoods, and find those easily. So with this project, we do have limitations. One thing to highlight is this isn't for regulation. This is for regional planning. So lots of cities do a very similar process. They can look at for finding pools for tax purposes. But we are looking at this at regional scale, like how much turf is there within our, within whatever area, whatever subdivision or city that you're looking at, how many pools and things of that nature. So we found that at that scale, it's working great, especially when we enhance it with parcel use codes, which I'll explain in a minute. So like with any project, so we did all the classification, it was great, but it wasn't going to help their model with just having all these pixels classified. So we've been working on analysis to help with that. And that's really just to find those areas of high water intensity with focusing mostly on those landscape features that we classified would be like the turf, the pools, urban lakes, and then we enhance it with using the land use code. So one of the first questions that we were able to we answered was just how many parcels that are commercial land use have turf on them. And so we brought in the 2021 parcels for the 3 counties for our AOI and used and did a summarize on each of the parcels. So we were able to get all the pixel counts with each parcel and understand, is there a pool present? Is there turf present? And then you also, so like here, if you select this one, it's commercial property. It's used for an office building. you have about 317 square meters worth of turf. And then of that turf, it's not even 1% is heavily watered, so that healthy ground cover. So it just kind of gives you those, quick summary things, so someone can find these clusters, understand how many commercial parcels they may have in their area of interest. And that was great for a quick analysis, kind of just getting a feel of where things are. But we wanted to do more of a weighted overlay analysis. So with water demands, there's this term they use a lot is non-functional turf. And these are 6 categories that you find a lot when you start to talk about non-functional turf. And so this is what we used for our scoring system. And so essentially each pixel would get a value based on each of these categories, and then we'd sum it up. So for instance, if you were looking at a piece of turf and it was in your HOA's common area, you would get 3 points. And then if it was heavily watered, so it was very healthy grass, you would get another score of 3. So that would be 6 altogether for those pixels. And then if it was continuous, if those pixels were continuous, for maybe like 300 square feet, you would get another 2 on the score for this area. So together you would have a score of 8 for those pixels. And so you would see here that would fall down into this highest category. So this is about 2 standard deviations away from that median value for the ranking of all the turfs that we did. So it helps you understand the value compared to other turf within the regional scale. But we still, that was fantastic. We really enjoyed this results, especially since each of these are separated. So if we say they were discussing and they really wanted to remove this continuous turf because that's not important, we were able to you can quickly redo those mouth calculations. But you aren't able at a regional scale. So you're looking at all 3 counties at once. You need to have something that kind of qualifies together. So we use the RPA has a model grid size of 1/4 mile. So we use that and did a summarized statistics for each of those on that raster of the scoring. So here you can see the standard deviation is going to be this purple value or the median value. So then every standard deviation away that's less is going to be the cooler colors, and the warmer colors is an increase. So your turf scores that are these warmer colors, these pinks here, have a higher non-functional turf purpose or intensity of water use for turf in here. We did the same thing for water scores with the same type of the cool to the warm. And so this was looking to understand where the pools and the urban lakes are. And the urban lakes really overweighted on that because that's a lot of water inside a grid. But together, you really do see some neighborhood trends. So we did this bivariate symbology here, so that if you see the purple, then that would be both are high. Otherwise, it's just the hot pink here is just a high turf score, and this blue here would be just a high water score without the turf. And this was really helpful because each of these model grid size now has a value tag to it. So if they just want to look at turf or look at it combined, they can do so, and then we can and they can kind of compare with this flattened look across the whole region. So for our wrap up, what are our next steps? We're still working on analysis because that's kind of always in an ever evolving practice, kind of asking more questions of the data, seeing how they can answer it. And then we're also working on sharing these outputs, especially the classification through AZGeo to the water community. We feel that has that was one of our main goals, to make sure that this can get utilized for a lot of people. And with that, I'll open it up to any questions.
Thank you so much, Karen. Are there any questions out there? If you don't pop up right now, we can throw it into the chat and come back to it if we have time.
Sounds great.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I just ask really quick. Yeah. So you said you used LiDAR data to differentiate between grass and trees. The LiDAR data that you used, did it come pre-classified with like ground points on it?
Classified with ground points on it. Yes, so it was only they had the ground classified on the LiDAR data, and then and so with the point cloud, we ended up, what we did was use the we did a height mean classification on the same cells that we used for the pixels. So that way that each of those pixels had also a mean value for what the height was.
Okay.
Does that, so yeah, it's the 3 double light data from the Maricopa Canal did have the ground cover classified.
Okay. The reason I'm asking is because we have our own LiDAR data set that I would love to get like a DEM out of, but I don't have those ground points, and I find it very difficult to like discover where, because Esri has some tools that are supposed to be able to, you're supposed to be able to like extrapolate those ground points, but it does a really bad job at it in some places. So I just think that's fascinating, and I think this whole project has been, such a great presentation. Thank you so much for sharing it.
Thanks.
Well, Cait, since you're on camera, do you want to go next?
Wait, who?
Jen, I think you're lagging a little bit.
Who, Jen?
What?
Who did you call in to go next?
Cait. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Cait, since you're on camera already, do you want to go next?
Sure. I feel a little embarrassed to be going after such a well put together and fantastic presentation. But hi, everyone. I guess I should introduce myself. This is my first time being in one of these meetings. I'm Cait Boyer. I'm a GIS data analyst with the IT department, City of Tucson. Recent graduate from the program here at the U of A, the GIST program here at the U of A. I graduated in 2021. But yeah, it's great to be here. Hello, everyone. So today I'm going to be talking to you about capital improvements projects. I don't have a presentation for you. We're just going to be clicking through some browser tabs. So what a capital improvements project is. What's up, Jen?
Are you sharing? Are you able to share?
Not yet.
Okay.
So I'm just going to talk for a second. You just have to
okay, I'm
bear with me. So basically what capital, I don't have a presentation. Otherwise I'd have pretty graphics for you. It'd be great, right? What a capital improvements project is like, taxpayers pay into, like, we approve things like propositions like Prop 401. Prop 411 is one that just recently passed here in Tucson, where it's like a 1% sales tax. And all of the money that is made from that 1% sales tax is going into this fund, which funds our capital improvements projects, right? So that's fixing the roads, building new parks, or improving parks, stuff like that. So in the past, I will now share my screen. Okay, so in the past, this is the way that the public receives their capital improvements information in these long PDFs that are, somewhat helpful. You can see there's one picture and then a bunch of words and a bunch of tables. So you can go in here and you can figure out, okay, where's El Pueblo Park? So the city manager's office approached our department, the IT department, saying, okay, well, this isn't a great way for public engagement. This isn't a great way to tell the public where their money is going. So can we work on developing some kind of dashboard that would show people, okay, these are the capital improvement projects that are happening near your house or near your neighborhood, right? So in that process, I was meeting with the CMO's office, the city manager's office, and also had learned about a coordination effort that was occurring between our water department and our Department of Transportation. So water and DTM's projects are often coinciding with each other, like the water lines run under the streets. But when DTM repaves a section of road, there's a paving moratorium put on that piece of roadway where you can't rip it up for another 5 years. So if water needs to be replacing a main under that, they are put on hold for 5 years. So why wouldn't we want to, if DTM's ripping up a road, we also want to get water in there to do whatever they need to do. And in the past, that hasn't been happening. So I'll just put this up here just for a visual. So DTM and water were already in talks, already getting together and discussing how can we coordinate better? How can we talk to each other in a way that like we can tell, okay, well, this main needs to get replaced within the next 5 years. If you're going to be ripping up the road, let's talk. Let's get these two together so we can be spending less money than ripping up the road twice, right? So that those two combined efforts, like my dashboard with the CMO, to track capital improvements projects, and water and DTM's efforts, they were kind of the same thing. We're kind of looking at the same thing. Obviously, for the city manager's office, we're not looking at some of the details that we will be between water and DTM, but basically what we want to do is build these data sets, tracking our capital improvements projects via GIS. So what we're looking at right here, this is our Tucson Delivers page, which is a great website if you ever want to go, tucsondelivers.tucsonaz.gov. But this is one of the dashboards it's a web app builder that's in that website. And this is basically showing all of DTM's capital improvements projects, and the different colors indicate the different propositions. So yellow is Prop 411. Yeah, there's a bunch of different projects that are being shown on here. So DTM already had a data model that they were working with, that's pretty extensive, and they had a lot of information in theirs, and they're okay at tracking their capital improvements projects because they have such a public facing application, which is Tucson Delivers. Let me just open Tucson Delivers, Emma, because lovely Laura created this. So this is kind of a website where people can come and see, okay, what's happening in my neighborhood. And so this does a great job of showing DTMs, the transportation network, what's being done on the streets in my neighborhood. But there's also money going to water and to parks. So we talked to both water and parks, and there's of course other departments that also need to be in on this conversation. But how do we develop a data set that is similar enough to DTM's and has enough fields in common that we can like have this common language of GIS, right? So we worked a lot with water and with parks to develop a data set that's similar to DTM's, but it also like serves their needs as well. Like, for example, parks is going to need a field for what kind of play structure is going to be in this park, or like what kind of structure are we improving? Is it a splash pad? Is it, but DTM doesn't need to know that, right? We don't need that same field in DTM's data set. So just working with the departments and figuring out what are those data needs, and then giving them the opportunity and giving them the tools they need to be able to edit that data easily. So what we're looking at here is Tucson Water's CIP editing. So a project manager at Tucson Water can easily come in here and click on align and change it. Okay, I'm going to assign this project manager to Albert and then update. And that goes straight to our databases. And it updates the databases. You never have to leave ArcGIS Online. All you have to do is be on the city network. This is all cloud-based. In efforts to just make things very easy, because that's one of the difficulties we've had in the past with updating the CIP information is project managers don't want to update this data. It's too cumbersome. So making it as easy as possible was very important and something that we achieved using GIS. And something you can see, like, just as I was mentioning the data structure, these are some of the things that we added to water's data structure, including like the project manager, their phone number, their supervisor, when the construction begins and when it ends. We found that in their previous data set, all of this information was extremely out of date. I think the last time they had updated it was 2016. So that being said, so now that we have these data sets in place and we can compare waters and DTMs, and I'm ignoring parks, sorry, Jen, for just a moment. Now that we have these data sets in place, now we can put them all on one map. And I know this is a little busy, but see where our projects are intersecting and where we have the opportunity for coordination. So waters projects are shown in blue, go figure. DTM's projects are shown in red, and the more opaque the line, the closer it is to construction completion. So here, just as an example, here is an example of a place where we have an overlapping segments. We could potentially look at these for coordination. I know for a fact I've talked to the project manager on this project. They have already started coordinating with DTM to say, okay, well, we have this project over here. While you're doing this project, maybe we can like combine those and put them into the same project spec and make sure that we're only ripping up the road once and that we're spending less money because it's all just in one project. So this tool has already been proving helpful for them. And I guess I should clarify that this is the coordination application. This is all internal facing. And it includes a lot of other layers outside of just the CIP layers. Like you can see the fiber optic network. You can see like a bunch of waters infrastructure, which is something we definitely do not want to be releasing to the public, right? That's a national security problem. But it's going to enable DTM to see where waters pictures are. Maybe if they have a valve that is in a street, in a roadway, they need to be aware of that valve so they don't just pave over it, right? And this application makes that possible. You can come in here and you can see the valves. If it'll load. I'm at home, so it might be a little slow. But even if that doesn't load, it's fine. So that is just kind of the coordination side of things between the different departments and how they're going to be talking to each other and making sure that they get what they need out of this application and these data sets that I've created for them. But also this is going back to the city manager's request, this is the public facing capital improvement projects dashboard. So what this is showing, it's 3 different dashboards, ArcGIS, and they're split up between in construction, future, and past projects. And so like right now we're looking at the in construction projects, and say I live in Ward 6 and I want to see what projects are going on in Ward 6. You can just quickly filter. And then it'll show you a list of all of the different projects that are going on in your neighborhood or your ward. Excuse me. And it's split up between linear projects. So these are lines and these are point projects. So all the parks or water projects. And you can come in, like if I live over here, I can kind of see. Okay, so this data is not up to date. This hasn't been publicly released yet. So forgive me if it's old data, Jen. But hypothetically, Mesa Village Park is in construction right now, and they're replacing the existing playground and adding shade. Or you can come over here and see what DTM's doing on the 3rd Street Bicycle Boulevard. Or you can find out what's going on in the next year or so in my neighborhood. Planned projects, which there's a lot of them, right? And I think this is so great. You can come in here and click what's going on at Reed Park, and you can find out. So that's kind of where we're at, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Wonderful. The editing app that you have, is that in an experience builder thingy? Okay.
Yeah.
So I know I'm gonna pick your brain, because I want to, get our capital people to update their projects, so I don't have to.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love the looks of that one.
Yeah. We will definitely we'll talk.
Cool. And you have a question of like what platform was that last city manager dashboard?
Yeah, that is a it's an experience builder with 3 dashboards embedded in it. Here, I'll share one more time just so I can show you explicitly what it is. So obviously this is an experience, like this up here at the top is an experience, but then these with like these embeds within it are dashboards. Yeah. Hope that answers that question.
Awesome.
I'm curious about why you use the GeoCortex application for part of it.
That is a great question. And I'm regretting it at this point. The reason was that Experience Builder doesn't have a lot of the great features that Web App Builder did. I know they're supposed to have parity, but just the simple thing of like being able to uncheck a layer and check a layer, which is just like so simple and easy to understand. But in Experience Builder, they have like eyeballs, like a layer list, you know, you turn off a layer and it's like an eyeball with a cross through it. Can't we just go back to check marks? So anyway, the main reason I went to GeoCortex is because of the layer list is more intuitive to me, I think. But we've found that it doesn't have the kind of querying tools that Web App Builder or Experience Builder have. So we are probably going to be changing our platform for that in the future. I wish GeoCortex was better, but we'll see. Anyway.
Carol has a question in the chat. When somebody updates a record, does that update a feature service?
No, so it's tied directly to our production databases. So we have an editing database, and so there's a web service that is feeding directly from our editing database. So any updates that are made in the web version, you have to be on the city's network for this to happen, obviously, but those edits will just go straight back to the database.
Excellent. Any other questions for Cait?
Question, Cait. I know you kind of briefly mentioned that. So when I worked at ASU, we did something similar, but I could never get the project managers to update data. And you said it was the form, but how did you get them to work on the workflow part? Do you have any tips or tricks to get someone to change their workflow so they
Get the city manager on your side?
So basically it's a top-down approach, like you're going to do this and
Absolutely.
it's now you're going to be held accountable.
Absolutely. I keep telling the project managers, you need to do this or Tim Tamir is going to come and I'm going to sick Tim Tamir on you. So
That makes
It's-
sense because
it's
they
been
never
tough.
saw they didn't have something to buy into it. Like this is going to help me. It was just like another step they had.
Right. I mean, and that's a big part of it, right? Like being able to show these people, show the project managers that this is going to help you in the long run. Like this is going to be helpful for you is such a big part of it. And just being like, and having project managers that are interested and care about this kind of
Mhm.
stuff has been extremely helpful. Like they've already started their own talks, right? Before I ever wasn't even involved, they had already started their own talks of how do we do this? So I don't have great advice for you other than just a top-down approach, I guess.
No, that is good. Thank you.
I have a question. This is Marlinda. So with that said, once you worked with the project managers, are they set up on a group on your enterprise, or so only the specific project managers are within that group with those editing permissions?
Yeah, so that editing application that we just saw is actually hosted on ArcGIS Online because our enterprise is not hooked up. It's not public facing. So, well, not that it would need to be. Anyway, it's hosted on ArcGIS Online from servers that are being published from our standalone servers. Now, So yes, there is like a group within our ArcGIS Online environment where only people who are added to that group can see it, and only project managers are in that group. So yeah, there's that permissions thing where only they're being able to edit it.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Alrighty. Well, thank you, Cait. Let's move on to our next one. Hey, Jamie, want to tell a story?
Okay. See if my video is working here.
Yep.
Okay. Hold on, I gotta get everything. All my windows arranged here when you're. Okay. I'm sharing the right one, right?
Everything's good.
Okay, good. And I'm going to turn off my video just because it's for bandwidth. All right, so my name is Jamie Dennis, for those of you that don't know me. And I was one of the founders of the the Arizona chapter for Women in GIS, and now super pleased that Jim Facilis and Cait Donaldson are taking over the leadership in this chapter, so it's going to be great. And I'm here to tell you a little bit about storytelling. This is going to be a little different for those of you that may have seen this presentation. This is similar to what I did at the AGIT conference last year. My friend Deb, who I think is on the call here, had asked me if I would do this lightning talk, make a shorter version of it for you guys today. So that's what I'm doing. And so this is a little different presentation. So I'm going to talk about storytelling. And I thought, what better way to talk about storytelling than to tell you a story? Now, this story is about this guy here that you see on the screen. His name is William Finley, and he was a biologist, a conservationist, a photographer, and an avid birder. And this is in the late 1800s and early 1900s. Now, this story takes place in a place called the Klamath Basin, and it's right here along the Pacific Migratory Flyway. And let me give you a closer look here. So specifically, I'm going to be talking about, or this story actually takes place in the Upper Klamath Basin, which is located here along the Oregon-California border. It's known for its rivers, its lakes, and its wetlands that for centuries have brought water birds here during their migration. And today it's home to the 6 national wildlife refuges that you see labeled right here on the map. Now, going back in time again, in the 1800s, a man named Peter Skene Ogden came out to the Klamath Basin, and he was a hunter, a fur trapper. And he reported back that the country out here, for as far as the eye could reach, was just one continued swamp and lakes, which really doesn't sound that great, especially because there were actually 350,000 acres of lush wetlands, shallow lakes, and marshes in this area. And people were drawn to this area, hunters were drawn to this area as word got around that there were millions of birds filling the sky here. There were gulls, there were terns, there were ducks, there were geese and grebes and herons and egrets. So naturally, of course, hunters, explorers, and birders were just, they were just drawn to this area. And in 1905, this is when our central character, William Finley, arrived in the Klamath area with his longtime friend, Herman Bowman. Now, Finley and Bowman had heard about these huge flocks of birds, but specifically they heard about great white herons. And they were drawn here to find them, to study them, and of course, to photograph them. Now, when they got to this area, Finley wrote in his journal, Here we were, standing on the high headland, looking out over the land of our quest. Here, spread out at our feet, was a domain for wildfowl unsurpassed in the United States. A far better picture in your mind than the one that Peter Ogden gave you when he talked about it being a swamp. So here was Finley, and they're out on this adventure. So let me show you a map. Now, I told you they were avid birders. So being avid birders, they're eager to find this great white heron that they had heard so much about. So they began exploring by boat on this area called Tule Lake. I have a pointer here. And they started up here on the northern section of the lake. They searched and searched there were these great Tule swamps, is what they were called, on the northern end. But they couldn't find a single white heron. So they decided to mosey on down south here into this location called Bloody Point. And so they began searching for this elusive whitewater bird. And here's a picture of Finley and Bowman paddling around Bloody Point. And they spent about a month and a half scouring the lake and surrounding wetlands where they found colonies of western grebe, white pelicans, Caspian terns, and so on, but they didn't find a single white heron. Because unfortunately, the hunters had gotten there first. The lure of millions of birds for their plumage brought hunters eager to earn their fortunes to the upper Klamath Basin. Now, there were no regulations to hold them back. So the birds were being killed by the tens of thousands. Now, during their quest, in fact, Finley and Bowman came across a hunter, and the guy told them that he had switched from hunting ibis to hunting the white herons because he had gotten no more than 25 cents for a pair of wings of ibis. But in 1890, he shot white herons for $2.50 each. And in 1898, he had made $1,200 in one day shooting white herons up in the upper Klamath Basin. Now that's a lot of money for 1898. So no wonder why the birds were being slaughtered. But what was driving this? What was driving this craze for all these birds? Well, it was this huge market for feathers as fashion. And I'm not talking about just a few feathers stuck in the hat's brim. Nope. Women were going crazy for hats adorned with not just feathers, but full-on taxidermy birds amidst a pile of feathers. It was all the rage. Finley, who had seen firsthand what had happened to these birds, was beside himself. And one of the things he wrote was, if the American woman could once follow in the trail of the plume hunter, she could find little pleasure in the use of our wild bird plumage. So Finley didn't just sit there and write in his journal. No, he decided to take action. So what he did, I introduced him. I said he was a photographer, a conservationist, a biologist, and a birder. But you know what else he was? He was a great storyteller. So to build awareness to this issue with all the birds being slaughtered, the needless, senseless slaughter of all these birds, he would give lectures or presentations where he would share images of the many birds that he and his friend Bowman had photographed in the upper Klamath Basin. They were beautiful, but he didn't want to show just their beauty because that could just lead to more women wanting beautiful birds stuck on their hats, right? So he also wanted to show them the truth, the ugly side of this plume fashion craze. And he did. He showed them pictures of the atrocities, the horrors that were inflicted upon these birds. In fact, this is an article from the Detroit Free Press in 1908 after he gave one of his presentations or lectures. And a quote here, they said, William L. Finley caused at least 50 women to gaze guiltily at the plumes which they wore in their hats, to shed a few tears as the horrors of the lives of the hunted birds were displayed to them. And at that time, there were an estimated 5 million birds a year being slaughtered just in the name of fashion. I mean, at this rate, soon there was not going to be any birds left. They would be just hunted to extinction. So Finley took it upon himself in his storytelling. He would go out and his presentations, his lectures, his articles. These stories helped to spur on the conservation movement. Many, many women who had once worn these feathers as fashion were convinced, and they began forming local Audubon chapter societies, and they began to boycott this plume hat phase or fad. And they pledged not to wear birds or bird plumage of any kind. And so it worked. His storytelling worked. He was able to engage it. But you know what? He didn't stop just there. He went to another audience. He took his story all the way to the top. The stories and photographs that he and Bowman took on their many trips were instrumental, not in just building awareness for the protection of water birds. He took and he sent a letter along with some of the hand-colored photographs like you see here of the water birds in the Klamath Basin. And he sent these along to President Roosevelt himself, urging the president to protect critical habitat for these birds. And you know what? Finley was no dummy. The president was an avid hunter himself. But Finley knew that if he could tell the story, if he could let the president know that soon there would, without regulations, without some protections, there would soon be no birds left to hunt. And so the president was convinced, and it worked. Finley's powerful photographs and his passionate storytelling were instrumental in encouraging President Theodore Roosevelt to establish several bird refuges in the Klamath Basin. In fact, in 1908, the president established the Lower Klamath National Wildlife Refuge as the very first waterfowl refuge in the nation. And so Finley's storytelling was instrumental in all that. Now, this is one of the things Finley said, and I thought this was a great way to wrap up the little story by telling you about him. But, you know, he didn't have what we had, but he had stories, you know, and he didn't have the internet, he didn't have social media, and he didn't have story maps, but he had an idea. Tell a story to get people to care, to draw them in so they will want to make a change for the better. And it worked for him. So like I said, today we have story maps, but to make them as powerful as you can, you got to have a compelling story and you need to tell the story. And so how do you do that? A story, what makes a good story? It's simple. There's three key elements. First one is trust. A story should build trust between you and your audience. It needs to resonate with people. Try to find some common ground. And, you know, like Finley, what did he do? He found the common ground. Everybody likes birds. And so he used that to draw them in and to build this movement that he started. So build the trust with them and build a common ground and a plot. Every story is going to have a plot, a conflict, a hero, a solution. You know, Finley's plot was this issue with the birds being killed and slaughtered. And so he used that to his advantage. And he also did something pretty unique. He wasn't the hero. He made the audience his hero. The women who formed the chapters, the Audubon Society chapters, they were the heroes. The president for establishing the wildlife refuge, they were his hero. And so he did that way. And the third thing is simple. Simple. A story is simple. Simple enough so that everybody can understand it. Your audience needs to understand it. Know, what do you want your audience to know or feel or do? Keep that in mind when you're making your story. And so I want to go, I'm going to wrap up just a little bit here, but I want to show you a way to remember, how can you do this? How can I do these three things to make a simple story? Okay. I mentioned that you need a plot or a structure and keeping it simple. So build it. The basic storytelling technique that you learned as a kid, build it that way. And it starts with what? Once upon a time. And then it'll go on. Once upon a time, there was blank. Every day, blank. One day, this happened. Because of that, this happened. Until finally, blank. And ever since that day, blank. So use this story time spine. It's called a story spine, and fill that in so that you know that you're covering every base and you have a story that goes on. So if we use this for Finley's story of the Klamath Basin, it might go something like this. Once upon a time, there was a vast wetland area. Every day, millions of birds filled the sky. One day, birds were killed and the water was drained. Because of that, the bird population plummeted until finally the habitat was protected. And ever since that day, conservation work continues. So it's simple. It's a structure. Build your structure. Before you jump into making that story map or that PowerPoint, get your story spine lined up. And with that, I'm going to leave you with my 5 storytelling tips. The first one is, what's your goal? What do you want your audience to know or do after hearing or reading your story? Number 2 is tell a story. So actually tell a story. Don't just throw a bunch of information out there. Sketch it out, outline it, use the story spine, take out extraneous stuff. 3, appeal to your audience like Finley did. He appealed to the women by showing those pictures and showing the lives of the birds. He appealed to the president by showing these beautiful birds and what it was like and talking to them. So find a common ground and appeal to your audience, and use engaging visuals. So photographs, you don't need a bunch of words on a slide. You use some imagery, use some pictures, do that. Use engaging visuals and get inspired. So, check out the thing that I like to do is go to Story Maps, Esri's award, the Story Map galleries, and look at all the winners and get inspired by that. And you guys can make great stories because you guys all have it in you. And I think I would love to see stories that you guys have done, because I think there's some great stories out there that need to be told. And we have the tools at our fingertips that Finley did not have. So that's what I have to say.
Fantastic, thank you.
Going to stop.
Anybody have any questions? You've got thank yous in the chat going on.
You're welcome.
Yay. Fantastic.
Okay. And I'll put my email address in here so you guys can send me your stories when you get them. Inspire me.
Awesome. All right, chugging right along. Our next presenter is Laura Sharp from the city of Tucson.
Hey everyone, I'm Laura Sharp. I'm a equity data project manager in the city manager's office at the city of Tucson. And I'm working on something called the Tucson Equity Data Strategy, which I will talk about. And first I'm going to kind of give you an overview of what the Office of Equity is, what our sort of agenda is, and how long we've been around. And then go over just some of the main points that are making up the data strategy. And I'm always confused about Zoom because we don't use it. So bear with me. How do I share my screen? All right, did I succeed?
Yep.
Awesome. All right, so I'm just going to show this PowerPoint. It wasn't really my plan to show this, but I think it kind of gives a good introduction. This is what we just presented to Mayor and Council a few weeks ago. We have been in office for basically 1 year. So in 2020, the Mayor and Council first decided that we needed to have a strategic equity plan for making sure that all of our services and programs were being equitably distributed. They partnered with the Government Alliance on Race and Equity to administer an equity employee survey to kind of take the temperature on where employees stand regarding their thoughts around equity. And then March of last year, the Chief Equity Officer was hired. And in September 2022, I was hired along with another employee engagement project manager. And since then, we've just been kind of ramping up our employee engagement efforts. I've been building this data strategy and really just trying to normalize a culture of equity throughout the city. We also this year conducted our second equity budget analysis, which means that all of the departments have to use this tool to look at their budgets with an equity lens. And then most recently, we created something called departmental equity coordinators. And I'm just going to kind of go through this really quick because this was not the main point, but I think it helps set the stage. So these are the people. Larissa's our Chief Equity Officer. There's me and Minako. Our primary function in the city is to advise other programs. So we're sort of central in the city manager's office, but we work with all of the other departments and programs to help them set equity metrics and just make sure that they are sort of aligning with the city's goals and how we interact with citizens, and just that we're being equitable in everything that we do. So these are some of the major programs that we have partnered with in the city, working to redevelop the racial equity assessment survey as a biannual tool. These are the departmental equity coordinators. So they're people who, they're from every department. They come to the city manager's office a couple times a month, and they sort of distribute the message to their department. So that's how, part of how a 3-person office is able to get so much ground covered, make sure that we're hitting every corner of the organization. Doing employee engagement, lunch and learns, read a book club, a newsletter. And then these are sort of the things that we're doing in the year ahead. And the big one that's relevant to what we're talking about today is this Tucson equity data strategy. And so I'm just kind of pointing out that this is one of the current 3 pillars that we're working on, in addition to long-range planning, which is developing an equity action plan that will guide the organization in sort of what is the roadmap for incorporating equity in our work. And then growing capacity, which is continuing to make sure that everyone has the knowledge and training and tools that they need to understand equity, how to incorporate it in their work, and just kind of creating that culture of equity. So that's kind of the overview. And then I'm going to switch to talking about the strategy specifically, but not really. Okay, I'm still going to go over some backgrounds. This is our website, equity.tucsonaz.gov. Check it out. It kind of covers that same material. But I also wanted to sort of show you the equity budget analysis that I mentioned. And the reason I'm pointing this out is this is a toolkit that departments were asked to use to, let's skip to the data section, to analyze their budget. And it's interesting because it shows that at a high level, there is a strong support for making sure that departments are using data to analyze their program success. And specifically, we're asking, does your budget account for, did you use disaggregated data to drive the decisions that you're making in your budget? And then also, how will your department collect, track, and evaluate disaggregated data to assess equity impacts? So you can see that the Office of Equity is really pushing for departments to incorporate data into the way that they think about equity. And because of that, because this is going to be something that's really important, we want to make sure that we're providing departments with the tools that they need to actually do that, because it's not something that everyone is comfortable doing. And so that is where the Tucson Equity Data Strategy comes in, or TEDS, which is really the focus of what I want to talk about today. So the Tucson Equity Data Strategy is designed to give staff, as well as citizens, community groups, anyone who wants to incorporate equity in their work, the tools that they can use to do that. And currently it is made up of 5 parts. This is not a story in Jami's sense of a story. It is more of an information tool. So you can go along the top to get to each of the 5 main sections that we're thinking about. The first part of the data strategy is the demographic collection policy. And this is really one of the most important pieces, because this is setting up what the city collects about citizens when we go out and do community engagement. So you can think about the work that Cait was talking about. When we plan new park playgrounds or something, we often do public engagement to find out which play structure do you want, which, where do you want the new park, or where do you want sidewalks, or do you want landscaping? And then we ask, by the way, what's your race and ethnicity? How old are you? What's your income? And for each of these, each program kind of makes up their own demographic. Some don't ask them, some do. They ask different questions. They define race and ethnicity differently. So this is just setting up what everyone should ask. And the benefit of that is it takes the burden off of staff, so that they're not all trying to reinvent the wheel. People want to be inclusive, but they don't know the language to use. This just puts it all out there for them. It also has the benefit for our citizens of making sure that we're always using the most inclusive language that we can, so that everyone feels represented. And then the technical benefit is that once we've standardized this data collection, then we have the ability to build tools around it. So we can create the data pipeline that takes data, transforms it, and puts it back into the system in a way that can be easily analyzed and visualized. And we want to make that as easy as possible for our staff so that they feel encouraged to do this. And they're not going, well, I did this survey, but now we're waiting on IT to analyze it, and maybe in a year we'll find something out about it. The tools will just be there in place to make that happen. And so the way this works is that we'll have minimum and comprehensive questions. So minimums are questions that staff are required to ask people, and comprehensive are optional. And we'll be providing all of the information on when do you want to collect minimum, when do you want to collect comprehensive, why would you do that? And currently we are doing a survey and outreach at events, talking to people about how they feel about the questions that we've already proposed. So you can go to this website and look at the questions. I think I have one pulled up. Yeah. So this is the survey as it stands. We're doing some, or at least, the questions that we're proposing, we're doing things a little bit differently than you might expect. We are including Middle Eastern and North African, for example. We are including Hispanic and Latino, Latinx in the race and ethnicity question. That's not the way the census does it, but research has shown that this is actually the way many people prefer to identify, that they don't want to select a certain race followed by an ethnicity question. They want the option of only identifying as a Hispanic or Latino. Another one that is a little bit tricky that we've been really workshopping is our gender question. So we're trying to make sure that we have language that is as inclusive as possible, so that people, if you're a transgender man, you can identify as a man instead of only being able to identify as a transgender man. And we're also incorporating the word cisgender to try to normalize the idea that there is not just man and then transgender, that each person has to select the same option, that it's one or the other. So that is, That's the collection policy. We're also building an equity data hub, which we're partnering with Esri to get all of the most relevant census data enriched into all of the city's boundaries that people use the most. So our wards, our neighborhoods, precincts, annexations, police divisions, planning boundaries, anything that people use that they might want to understand the demographics of will already be available, and it will be a script that automatically updates either when the data is updated or when the geography is updated. So if we annex a new area, it will automatically update that and provide the most up-to-date data to people, and they can always come here and know what they're getting. And so this also makes sure that staff are always relying on the same data, that we're not all referring to different numbers when we talk about different aspects of the city's population. The third piece is a vulnerability index. Indices are pretty popular in the city as a way of guiding program decisions. Two common indices that we see used right now in the city are the Neighborhood Vulnerability Index on the left and Equity Priority Communities on the right, which was developed in San Francisco. The one on the right was used for our Move Tucson, which is sort of our transportation plan. The one on the left is often used for housing specific projects. Neither of these are wrong. They're both just two different ways of thinking about who our vulnerable communities are, and they have different purposes. But we're trying to come up with a shared definition of what vulnerability means in Tucson so that we can make sure that we're talking about the same people when we prioritize. And that doesn't mean that that you wouldn't want to include very specific metrics on, housing or climate, but we want to sort of start with that base of who are the people that we're talking about when we say vulnerable. And when the Office of Equity asks you, what did you do to help vulnerable populations this year? People don't have to say, well, what do you mean by that? What are these populations that you're referring to? So this is another one that we're getting feedback on. So we would like the citizens to chime in on what they think makes a community vulnerable or what makes them feel vulnerable. We know that there are certain factors that are known to contribute to vulnerability, but we don't want to just tell the community, by the way, did you know that you're vulnerable? This way they can kind of say, this is what makes me feel vulnerable, so that we can make sure that we're helping those people. A census infographic tool. So this is really just, it's a web app builder. It's the business analyst tool in web app builder. We will be transitioning to experience builder now that we know that web app builder is being discontinued. I honestly think this will be one of the most useful tools for our staff because it's really easy. You can either select a geography. This is that sort of checkbox that Cait was talking about. You can really just turn layers on and off. You can select a geography, and this is very beta right now, so it's ugly. Select an infographic and it will run it. And I think there are a lot of people in the city who, they don't need it to be a real-time tracking dashboard doing analysis. They just are filling out a grant and they need to know how many 18 to 64-year-olds there are in this ward. Yeah, so I think that will be really useful for a lot of people, and we'll be branding them. You have complete control over these layouts. So we'll be working with departments to see if there are specific layouts that they want for their uses. Sorry, I lost my place. Okay. And then the last thing is the demographic data toolkit. And so this is basically the how-to guide for all of these things that we just described. So how do you use that app? How do you use the collection policy? How do you choose the right tool? Is Survey 123 right, or do we want to use OpenGov? How do I choose the minimum versus comprehensive options? How do I make a dashboard? Or now that I've collected, mapped data about the people I'm doing outreach on, how do I, get some sort of spatial statistics about that and kind of lay out all of these tools in an easy, getting started package. We'll also be working with our IT department to write scripts that will do sort of these data transformation processes so that you can take survey data and it doesn't always come in a really useful format. So how can we set it up to transform that data and put it back in a useful way, or to do an equity analysis where you're looking at the intersecting identities of your responses and understanding how those different identities responded differently to questions that you had. So that's everything that's in the toolkit. We are taking a survey. So if you're in the Tucson area, I don't know how many people in this group are in the Tucson area. We would love to get your feedback on how you feel about the demographic questions, if they represent you, or what you think makes up vulnerability. And also just really open to any kind of feedback on how to make a process like this better in an organization like ours.
Fantastic. Thank you, Laura. Does anybody have any questions, Laura? I'm not hearing anything, but I love that lookup tool. I need to put, we have a kind of a list of tools that we can use, and so when that's ready for prime time, I will put it on our list and start using that. Fantastic. Yay. Thank you very much. And surprise, surprise, we have one presentation. Karol, can we squeeze you in?
Yeah, please do.
Awesome. Take it away.
If I can figure out how to share my screen here.
At the bottom green share screen.
Oh, hey, yeah, right there, right in my face. Okay. All right, so I think I'm sharing the right screen. Am I? Do you see my presentation?
Oops. Yep.
Yeah. We can.
Okay. Okay, great. Okay, so hi everyone. I'm Karol Francis. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a project lead at a transportation consulting firm called Works Consulting. And in my role, I create a lot of online maps, dashboards, and apps for the Arizona Department of Transportation. And I have been working as a consultant to ADOT for a little over 3 years in a couple of different roles. And so before I started working with ADOT, I would put some thought into the colors and symbology I use when building maps and other visualizations. And of course, I wanted to make sure that my audience could correctly interpret the message I was trying to convey, but I also tried to choose colors that were complementary or pretty. But I never really paid much attention to accessibility. It turns out that at least one of the ADOT managers has color blindness. So 3 years ago, I found myself suddenly very concerned with web accessibility, which is a topic I had never been on my radar before. And looking back, it's a little surprising that I hadn't encountered a colorblind user before, as colorblindness is not uncommon. Roughly 4% of the general population, or 8% of men, are colorblind, and that equates to about 1 in 12 men. So if you have a big group of men, which all of us in the GIS field are apt to have, odds are you have at least 1 or 2 colorblind people in your audience. So it turns out that there are established best practices for creating web accessible content called the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG. These guidelines are published by the Web Accessibility Initiative, which falls under the World Wide Web Consortium, or W3C. The WCAG guidelines are comprehensive, with the ultimate goal of providing benchmarks that will make the web accessible to people with a diverse range of hearing, movement, sight, and cognitive abilities. And today we're going to talk about a very tiny component of these comprehensive accessibility guidelines, and that's the use of color. And so the WCAG guideline for the use of color states, color is not used as the only visual means of conveying information, indicating an action, prompting a response, or distinguishing a visual element. And what that means for us as GIS professionals is that when we use color to convey information, we should also use hue, texture, shape, and or text. And we should avoid relying solely on color to convey information whenever possible. And so I have some examples. This web map displays some metrics about point data in the Scottsdale area. The green circles indicate good ratings, the yellow circles indicate fair ratings, and the red circles indicate poor ratings. Now, if we simulate green color blindness, it's very difficult to discern the difference between the green and yellow circles. However, the red circles stand out a little bit from the crowd, a little bit. They're right there. There's one. So I took the same map and I made a small modification to the symbology of the map, and I changed the shape for fair ratings to yellow squares, and I changed the symbol for poor ratings to red triangles. And when we simulate color blindness, we can much more easily tell the difference between the features with a good and fair rating, since the circle and square shapes are much easier to discern. And here's another example. This is a dashboard under development. The numbers on this dashboard are mostly nonsense at this point, but eventually the dashboard will display good, fair, poor ratings summaries grouped by different geographies. And let me walk you through this dashboard, because there's a lot going on here. First of all, the colors in the dashboard meet ADOT's published graphic standards. The dark blue background of each widget in the dashboard is what I call ADOT blue. It's the same shade of blue as the ADOT logo. The green and orange colors were chosen by ADOT's graphics team to complement the ADOT blue. And I chose a red color just because I needed a red color for a dashboard. And in the map widget, I used a color ramp for the polygons that is labeled colorblind-friendly by ArcGIS Online. I also labeled the polygons, so the map meets the use of color guidelines. The good, fair, poor gauges use both color and text to convey information, so they also meet the use of color guidelines. And now let's look at this thing, the annual trend widget. Unfortunately, there are some limitations in ArcGIS dashboards. The application does not allow me to change the line or marker patterns. And furthermore, it doesn't allow me to manually sort the legend, so the data is not listed in an intuitive order like a stoplight, red, yellow, green order. People with difficulty discerning colors probably won't be able to get a sense for annual trends on this line chart. So now let's simulate color blindness on this thing. And as I mentioned before, I used an Esri supplied colorblind-friendly palette for the map polygons. It could be better. The purple of Pinal County sort of blends in with the teal of Maricopa County. So I have a little bit of work to do here, but overall, not too bad. The gauges are serviceable. The text conveys meaning, even though the good, fair, poor colors seem to be the same color. So I consider the gauges to be a success. And much as I suspected, the annual trim line widget is pretty much impossible to decipher. The middle line is somewhat lighter than the other two lines, but is that the good line or the fair line or poor line? I wish Esri dashboards allowed me to change the shape of the points or change the trend lines to different dash patterns for each rating. I did submit an idea using Esri's ArcGIS ideas online. to ask for the ability to individually change the shape of points or the dash pattern on these line charts. And hopefully this upgrade will be incorporated in a future version of ArcGIS dashboards. And I have been using ArcGIS dashboards since it was in beta testing, and I have seen incredible improvements over time. So I'm pretty hopeful for this one. I think this will probably be appearing for us fairly soon. And so I have this very long list of resources. In my day-to-day work, I rely pretty heavily on the Colorblind-Friendly Chrome extension. It allows me to simulate 8 different types of colorblindness, so I can do my best to optimize the app I'm developing before I share it with my customers. The Color Oracle application works a lot like Colorblind-Friendly, but it's an executable program that you install on your computer. So it's great for testing the colors of your projects that are not web-based. And I am not yet using ArcGIS Pro, but I was really happy to learn that Pro now has a colorblindness simulator built into the software. And I personally tend to struggle quite a bit with choosing color palettes. Thankfully, resources like Adobe Color and Color Brewer can generate colorblind-friendly palettes, so I don't have to spend a lot of time driving myself crazy trying to find color schemes that are both colorblind-friendly and complementary. And lastly, if you would like to learn more about building accessible maps, visualizations, apps, and websites, I have a ton of resources. The web content accessibility guidelines are straightforward, but completely comprehensive and provide a substantial framework for developing content that meets the needs of people with a wide range of abilities. And this story map, Getting Started with Accessible Storytelling, is an Esri provided guide for the creation of accessible content. It covers topics including color, typography, including font kerning, and tips for building applications that are compatible with screen readers. Designing Maps for Colorblind Readability is an Esri blog post by Stephanie Oliver that covers some tips for optimizing color accessibility in ArcGIS Pro and ArcGIS Online. And it's a short read, but it's really densely packed with very helpful information. Color Design for the Color Vision Impaired is a scientific journal article published in Cartographic Perspectives by Bernard Jenny and Nathaniel Kelso, who are the developers behind the Color Oracle application. And lastly, I've posted this slide deck on my website that has all of these links so that you can access them easily if you're interested, and it's carolfrancis.com/color. And thank you. I am done.
Hey, thank you, Carol. Does anybody have any questions? See in the chat, Jamie says that Colorblind-Friendly is a resource that is great also.
Yeah, I use it all the time.
Thank you for providing that list of resources. That's fantastic. I know Color Brewer is something that I've known about and used for years. And that's always been really helpful, but it's good to see what else is out there.
Yeah, for sure.
Fantastic.
I didn't have a question, but I did just want to say thanks for sharing that. The city is really trying to ramp up our accessibility, and we're finding it very difficult because we rely so much on like web applications and visuals and
yeah, I totally agree with that. I think that this is sort of this is a new topic for me, and I wasn't taught about this in school. Kind of wish I was. And so everything I've learned is completely self-taught. And as we at ADOT, as we start pushing data outside of the agency and towards the public, it's becoming more and more important.
And I like what you said about having somebody in the office that was colorblind, because my IT guy is colorblind. So if I show him something and it all looks green to me, then I know I did it wrong.
Yeah, it was actually, honestly, it was kind of humiliating for me. I was a brand new hire, walk into this meeting, and I'm really proud of this thing that I built, show it off. And this manager at ADOT, he's a bit of a curmudgeon, and he says, I'm sure this is great, but I can't see it. What? He said, I'm colorblind. What? I just, okay, so this is a new challenge for me. And better figure this out now.
Yeah. Excellent. Anyone else?
I think there is a hand raised. Deb.
Oh, I'm sorry. Deb, yeah, go for it.
Okay, so I'm looking at the colorblind simulator, and there's 3 options. Is there one type that is not prevalent that we should be like the go-to, or is it just we should? Yeah, I don't know. I can't pronounce this properly, but the theater and opiate and
So-
opiate.
Yeah, so I think that the red blind and green blind are the more common versions, but the manager that I work with is, I believe, he has issues with yellow, and I'm not even sure which of these categories it falls into, but if I have shades of yellow, it's very difficult for him to see. So I always have to make things more orange for him. But yeah, the green week and red week, or green blind and red blind, are probably the more common ones.
It's kind of wild where like 2 of them look from the map that I made, look purple and baby poo yellow, and then for lack of better, more PC term, and then the other one, it's teal and pink. So like, it's just, I guess, like most people I never really thought about it, except, the only thing that got me started thinking about this was Jami's presentation last year. I think it was
Yeah.
Jami's at Egypt where she mentioned the colorblind stuff.
Yeah, Jamie and I have probably worked with the same colorblind person.
Okay, so now how do I undo the,
Undo the what?
I couldn't undo the colorblind simulator.
Oh, you click the top.
You
and
tap it
then-
again.
Yeah, the trichromacy normal one should undo it.
Cool. Awesome. Well, we've gotten to the end of our time. Thank you to Karen, Jami, Cait, Laura, and Karol for presenting and volunteering to present. Or saying yes when I asked you to present. Yay, this was fantastic. It's always really awesome to see what everybody is doing. And thank you, Jami. Don't forget the book club. Join us. I'm excited about this next book. It looks really interesting. And is there anything else I'm forgetting?
I don't think so, because you already mentioned Mugs and Mornings, but I did want to mention that the Women in GIS is doing a professional development workshop with Laura Royal, who I don't know if you guys remember, she did something before for Women in GIS on interviewing and one on resumes. And now she's going to do one in June on understanding yourself and others. And so I think it's kind of a Myers-Briggs type of thing, personality type stuff. So I'm going to put the link in the chat there if you guys want to check that one out. It's June 9th. So if you want to follow me.
Awesome. Thank you.
That's it.
Excellent. All right. Well, if we don't have anything else, thank you very much. We will see you again soon at Mugs and Mornings, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.